Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sequoia Freeman, and I am the V3 Training Coordinator. Before we begin, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Due to the number of attendees, you guys will all be placed on silent for the duration of the webinar. However, we will take questions. You can submit those via your GoToWebinar control panel, which should be located on the right-hand side of your screen. You should see a little tab that says questions there with a white box where you can type in your questions. We will be checking those questions throughout the webinar and trying to answer them as we can. And then, of course, at the end, we'll go through all questions and answer those that we haven't gotten to yet. The link to this webinar is available online. It is at dvsv3.com/download. You should scroll down until you see the word #HiringVets, and you can click that link to download the presentation. I also sent a reminder email out earlier today with a link as well, so you may have gotten that link directly to your email. There will be a brief survey that will pop up after the end of the webinar. It's about 7 questions, only takes a few minutes, and really helps to let us know what we can do to improve the webinar going forward or what we did well so that we can keep doing it. So please take a few minutes to do that once the webinar is over. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Sarah Peticha. She is our V3 curriculum developer.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what I think is going to be an exciting webinar for all of you. And I wanted to encourage you, so we probably have some very technically savvy people on this webinar. We want you to follow us on Twitter. We want you to follow us. Our handle is @V3Program, and of course our guest speaker @John_Thurman. We'd love to have you put your comments about this webinar and just start following us, because we will be beginning to use more and more of our Twitter capabilities with the V3 program. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to present John Thurman, who will be our presenter. He is a social media guru, and we're delighted to have him. He is also the Southeast Regional Human Resource Manager for Team Fishel, which is a V3 certified company, and it is in the engineering and utility construction industry. And I know that John's going to tell you more about this, but he's had quite a large background in a variety of different roles, whether it was in construction, utility, healthcare, accounting, and finance, but he's also held a lot of different roles in HR, from employee labor relations, recruiting, training, and HR leadership. He is also the social media director for the Virginia SHRM State Council and a member of the Capital Region Workforce Development Board that serves the greater Richmond area, and active with Richmond Area Veterans Economic Community Initiative, or the VECI program. He is a representative of the business community. As you can see, he holds the SHRM SCP certification, Labor Relations Contract Administration from Cornell University, and a master's in music education from the University of Kansas, a bachelor's in music education from Middle Tennessee State University, and he also is a Hootsuite certified professional. So without further ado, I'd like to have John take over and tell us more about how we can leverage social media in our veteran recruiting strategies.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. I really appreciate everybody taking time with what I'm sure are extremely busy schedules, especially first of the week, and all the calls and everything coming in that you have. I appreciate you taking some time to sit down and take part in this presentation. Sarah and I started talking about this particular topic back at the Virginia SHRM conference a couple months ago, and she said, you know, John, we know it's a need and we see it, and would you be interested in talking a bit more about it? And I always enjoy the opportunity to get up and talk about social media. It's something I'm very keenly interested in and am a fan of, so I appreciate that. What we're going to be covering today is, first of all, why should you be participating as an employer, as someone seeking veterans to join your workforce, and what is the draw to participate? We'll be talking about quite a few of the tools that are out there, ways to recruit veterans using those tools. I will be the first to tell you that it's not all the tools that are out there. They're constantly evolving and growing, and new ones are coming online, but we'll talk about some of the bigger hits, as it were, and some that you might recognize. And then finally, with all the different tools, how can you manage those particular tools when it comes to that recruiting process and identifying those veteran candidates. So when we talk about why we participate in social media, it really boils down to three main topics: engagement, learning, and brand. But to give you some perspective, in 2015, 78% of the U.S. population had at least one social media profile of some type. That's from 2008, when it was about 25% of the population. So we've seen this dramatic rise, and the question might be, well, John, why is there such growth? Part of it is generationally. Obviously we've seen the rise of the millennials into our workforce, and now on their tails is Generation Z. Generation Z is the population that doesn't know what it's not like to have a mobile device. Most of us can remember, if not even the early bag or cellular phones, maybe not even those, actually a phone that had a bar with two ends, and you listen in one end and talk to the other. It's not like what we see now and what the population may see. But using those mobile devices, becoming more active, becoming engaged there, 43% of that population is using a mobile device to look for jobs. So we need to be where those folks are going to be. And so the idea of being, participating there, knowing those numbers and understanding those numbers, again, engagement, learning, and brand. So we talk about engagement and learning. For those of you that use social media, I think you see the ability to engage rapidly. We're not waiting on folks to return phone calls, emails anymore. It can be an instant conversation next door, down the street, across the globe. I had a conversation with someone on Twitter in Australia a couple years ago, and in real time I'm communicating with this person literally halfway across the world, which at the time was mind-boggling. Now I see the power and the ability that these tools offer, so that ability to engage rapidly, to have simultaneous connections. It's not just a one-on-one conversation with a veteran anymore, maybe an entire population of veterans that you're talking to, and the idea that it's instant access. I will be the first to admit there's good and bad in this. It's harder and harder sometimes to separate what I call the wheat and the chaff. What are the good things that are out there in social media? What are the bad things? With the advent of mobile, with the advent of so many people having keyboards, let's face it, sometimes people will put out opinions, and it can be a bad thing. So there is some discernment there, and I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind. I always tell folks, think before you tweet. If it's something that you're not comfortable with, or that frustration, maybe you ought to step back and think about it before you make the comment, because there are downstream effects of that, and not all of them are going to be positive. You hear a lot about brand. We hear a lot about brand not only with our employment organizations, our companies, but also you're hearing more about personal brand these days. And what does that really mean? And brand is made up of three components: the value, what do you bring to the table? The audience, who do you serve? And the service proposition, what makes you unique? You take a look at that visual there. All those organizations, there's an instant idea. I see Starbucks, I think coffee, I think quick. I see Coca-Cola, I think long-term soda, a lot of different things that they have there. Apple, I think iPod. Those brands are very established. Not all of our companies are necessarily Apple, Google, Facebook, or Coca-Cola, but the idea being is what your brand is it clear to veterans? Are they going to understand the value, the audience, and the service proposition that you have? So it's really important as you work through the social media tools and you think about how you're communicating yourself, does it really match up to what you're trying to find in those folks that you're trying to find? One thing I always tell people to keep in mind, and if any of you, I know many of you on the call have probably been recruiting or working in HR or in some type of marketing role for some time, there's no magic bullet, there's no silver bullet to this. It's as much art as it is science. While social media and mobile is certainly on the rise, and certainly with the veteran population, a younger population coming out of the armed services and using these tools, it's still a mix. Am I going to be networking and meeting people one-on-one? Yes. Do I go to job fairs? Yes. Do I still use print ads? In my roles with some of my construction and field type work, absolutely. Third-party recruiters can sometimes be part of the equation. I just want to make sure that you understand that social media is just another set of tools to have in that toolbox when you're recruiting and you're identifying those veterans for opportunities. But understanding too that each social media platform has its own audience, and they're very different from each other in many cases. We talked about the why. Let's talk a bit about the platforms that are out there, and again, how can you be utilizing them when you're identifying potential veterans for opportunities. Facebook is kind of considered the big kahuna, the granddaddy of them all. 200 million registered users in the United States. 4+ million of those are veterans. Interestingly enough, about 40% of that veteran population is over the age of 45. So you're seeing a more seasoned, more experienced group of vets on Facebook there. A lot of opportunities for low-cost options to boost events to your work pages. You'll see the image there of our Team Official Jobs page. We've grown exponentially in the Richmond area over the last year and a half. When I first came on board, we had 1 office. We now have 3. We've added probably 90 teammates to our group, and we had an open house here. So as we talk about the other types of recruiting opportunities and things that you can do, we held an open house when we opened our 2nd office in town, and we did very, very low cost advertising. I reached out to the folks I know in my network, tweeted, did different types of social media blasts and conversation. But one of the things we did put a little bit of finance into was on the Facebook event page, and we paid to boost the event. Facebook has an incredible amount of data behind the scenes, as many of you may be aware, and they can slice and dice and determine who best to communicate that event to in a number of ways. So we asked them to identify certain people based on demographics, experience, interests, different things like that, and boosted that message. What I can tell you is from that particular open house, we had 50 people attend. 10 of them came from Facebook. So again, a low-cost, effective way to identify potential candidates and have them come in and talk to us. Best times to post for Facebook are weekdays between 1 and 4 p.m. And the worst time to post for the lowest volume of activity are going to be weekends before 8 a.m. and then after 8 p.m. LinkedIn. I'm sure the majority of us have a LinkedIn profile. Some of you may be using LinkedIn Recruiter or have used it in the past. Maybe if you're in job search yourself, you have the Job Seeker platform. But there are roughly 107 million users in the United States, 3+ million of which are veterans. And to LinkedIn's credit, they actually give veterans and transitioning service members a 1-year free Job Seeker subscription. So it allows them to boost their profile a bit, to get in mails and what have you, some things that a basic account would not offer. Roughly 40% of users use the site daily, which I think is a key component when you're looking for folks, when you're posting your opportunities out there and communicating. They recently upped the number of groups you can join. If you're not in groups, you're really missing an opportunity there. You're now able to join up to 100. Many of those are veteran-focused. I have a couple mentioned here, but the idea being you're going to where these folks are in that social media space. You're finding them there, communicating with them there, talking about your job opportunities and about your organizations. The best times to post with LinkedIn are between Tuesdays and Thursdays, either at lunchtime or right after work at 5 p.m. Worst times are Mondays and Friday evenings, which again, as I mentioned before, I really do appreciate everybody coming on, knowing it's a Monday and knowing that not a great day to post on LinkedIn. When it comes to Twitter, Twitter is probably my favorite social media platform. It's a microblogging site. Some of you may be familiar with it. The idea is you have 140 characters to communicate your message, and realistically, you're driving traffic to something from that. If you can tell in the image here on our Team Official Jobs page, I'm looking for a fiber optic splicing supervisor in Manassas. I have a link to the job, driving folks to our ATS to apply, and then I have hashtags there and a picture. I will tell you, using pictures will realistically double your traffic. The amount of click-throughs that you see, that visual cue really can help and help you stand out when you're tweeting. But again, the idea you're driving folks, driving them either to your job posts, to articles, things that you're doing there. Sequoia mentioned hashtags early on. You know, when I work with folks and I'm helping them with Twitter, I always tell them you follow handles, so at V3Program or at John_Thurman, but then you track hashtags. And Twitter kind of started it. You see Facebook and LinkedIn sometimes use them as well, Instagram. But the idea being when you're posting job opportunities, use hashtags like veterans, Military Monday, and SOV, which is Support Our Vets. That will help drive traffic as well. One of my favorite things in Twitter are chats. And unfortunately, there aren't any veteran-focused chats of late. For those of you who aren't familiar, the idea with a chat is typically they are scheduled on a set schedule. I'll give you an example. National SHRM has a chat every Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. It's called Next Chat. So they use the hashtag and the term Next Chat. They'll have a topic for the week, and sometimes many chats will actually post the questions prior to the chat happening. And the idea is they'll say question 1, they'll ask their question and use the hashtag NextChat. Folks that are participating in the chat will then answer and say, A1, here's my answer, hashtag NextChat. I've been involved with chats with dozens of people up to thousands of people based on the topic, and they can be highly effective in communicating, learning, getting a lot of great information from peers and other professionals, and learning more. So when I was talking through some of these things with Sarah, I mentioned that I looked for veteran chats. It doesn't look like there have been any of late, which is a shame, but keep an eye out for those. Again, there are HR chats and recruiting chats that are out there as well, and job search chats that you can find. The best place to find those, to find a list, is TWUBS, TWUBS.com. TWUBS will actually you can find a list of all these different events. Best time to post there, Monday through Thursday, is 1 to 3, and the worst time is after 8 p.m. each day. I will tell you from my personal experience, when it comes to our jobs page, I typically post a job 3 times in a day, so every 8 hours. So for example, midnight, 8 a.m., and 4 p.m. Different audiences are on Twitter at different times of the day, and so I'm able to see who's hitting when, but that they may not see it at that early morning or afternoon. So again, I typically recommend, if you're posting something repeatedly, either try once every 8 hours or once every 12 hours. Most of you are probably familiar with Glassdoor. They initially launched in June 2008 as a company review site, like to Yelp, for lack of a comparison. But the idea being that not only was it reviewing companies, they reviewed interview experiences, benefits, and what have you. Back in 2010, they added what they call the enhanced employer profiles. And the idea being, on one hand, people are giving them anonymous information about companies, but as an employer, you can also have an enhanced profile where you're posting your jobs and posting information about your opportunities. I will tell you that it's really traffic dependent based on industry. I have found personally that with my organization, we don't see as much traffic as more folks that are identifying folks for more professional or technical roles. Again, the primary jobs that I'm identifying are more construction and field related. Those folks may not necessarily be looking at Glassdoor as quickly as others, but there are 19 million U.S. users, and there are 8 million reviews of over 450,000 companies out there. So if you're not familiar, look your company up and see what has been left, if anything. One of the things Glassdoor does offer is the ability to create a free employer account, which is what I'm utilizing currently. I can have our information out there. You can add pictures. You can add information about offerings that you have. One of the nice things, too, is that Glassdoor allows you to respond to reviews by those anonymous sources. Interestingly enough, Glassdoor will tell you that if you have a 5-star review, or overall 5-star review in total, that people will see that as suspect. So it's okay to have not so favorable reviews out there. However, I would recommend making sure that you're responding to those as best you can when you can. Instagram. Instagram has come on the rise in the last bit of time. Roughly 80 million users in the U.S., 70 million photos a day are being shared there. And as I mentioned, just like with Twitter, make sure that you use hashtags when you're using Instagram, like veterans, hiring veterans, for example. The best time to post there is usually in the evenings. It's interesting. I walked through our parking lot the other day, and again, I have many of my field employees are a little younger and just starting their careers. I was amazed that several of them actually have stickers on their windows with their Instagram account IDs or tag names so that people can find them. That was new to me and quite a surprise. But again, you're seeing more businesses and brands looking into Instagram from a perspective. If we look at, or we talked about earlier, kind of where folks are. Instagram is heavily young adults at this point. 55% of their users are between the age of 18 and 29. And interestingly enough, too, for those of you that if you've used Instagram, typically what they have done is had a chronological stream. So if I logged on right now, I would see things that started in the next little while and work backwards. They have actually changed their algorithm, and now things will be sorted based on your user history. So it's even more important if you are using it from a recruiting perspective, using those hashtags, because as people search those, you have the opportunity to have your images be at the top or near the top of that timeline for that person, because they're going based on how they use it and what's out there. Briefly, some of the other tools, and again, there are a whole lot of them out there, but the idea being Google+. This is Google's fourth attempt at a social media platform. They have roughly 110 million users. I will be perfectly honest, I don't use it personally. I know people that do. It is another source, another way to be communicating your message out there. YouTube is a great place to be posting video of your organization and again, your intent to hire vets and tell that story. YouTube's the second largest search engine in the world. So it's ripe for opportunity to have content there and be sharing. Snapchat's one that's really on the rise. For those of you that may have teenage children, it is absolutely exploded in the last few years. There are 10 billion videos being shared daily on Snapchat, and the idea with Snapchat is it's an image or a video that you share with someone, they see it, and for a certain period of time, and then it disappears. There are over 100 million users of Snapchat. I will tell you up front, I have an account, but I have not used it. However, I will tell you that talking to some of my recruiting peers, I know of a recruiter with a big box retailer that's using Snapchat in his hiring process and recruiting process. It's very interesting. He will go to a store and he will take pictures of a manager, follow them a day in the life, for lack of a better word, and share it with his followers to show the manager talking to an employee, maybe coaching them on something, setting a schedule, working with customers, but telling it in a visual way, which has become much more important in this day and age. Telling that story in a visual format that's compelling and driving folks to be interested in that particular organization and to apply there. Pinterest, some of you may be familiar with Pinterest. The idea is visual bookmarking, it's finding things and pinning interest there. From a marketing perspective, Pinterest is very interesting in that it has, and what social marketers call half-life, it has the longest half-life of any particular social media platform. And by that, if I post on Pinterest today, I'm still seeing activity 2 years down the road from that particular post and potential. For example, on the other side, Twitter, which has the shortest half-life, a tweet has about 15-minute lifespan that people will see it unless they're searching for that hashtag or for that particular handle, that company, that brand. 15 minutes as opposed to 2 years is quite striking. Periscope is a really interesting tool. I've seen several employers using it very, very well. Periscope is an offshoot or in tandem with Twitter, and it's live video streaming. The idea being that you go online, and as you have followers, your followers get a notice, hey, so-and-so is periscoping currently, and you do your video streaming. Typically, it's no more than 5 to 10 minutes in length, and then once it's over, it's stored and people can go back and watch previous streams that you've made. The interesting thing there is as you pick up followers, they're going to continue to get those notifications as new videos are created, but you have this backlog of streaming access that people have as well. Particular employer, really exciting thing that I saw that I was sharing with a coworker of mine, this particular organization had one of their engineers on screen talking about his job. He'd been with the company 10 years, so he's a mid-career employee, talking about the opportunities that he had, some of the opportunities that they had upcoming, the types of folks they were looking for, and then in that stream, because it's associated with Twitter, people were able to ask questions. And so they were asking questions in real time that he was able to answer in that video. It went maybe 6 minutes, and it was done, and they went on to the next one and potentially posted down the road. But Periscope's, I think, a really exciting tool and one that I would recommend. One thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure it is most representative of your organization. Obviously, if you're in a role like mine or in an organization like mine, construction, we make sure that safety is paramount, and we have to make sure those things are in place before you start streaming. Reddit is a new site that many folks see these days, especially younger generation. It's a very active site there. Tumblr is another micro-blogging site where people follow other tumbles and go from there. Blogs, there are a lot of blogs out there, particularly in veteran-focused blogs that you can find. And then also podcasts. For those of you that aren't familiar with podcasts, picture a radio show that's recorded and it's available for a mobile device. It may be through iTunes. It may be through several of the sites that are available, such as SoundCloud, Podbean, Stitcher Radio, are some of the bigger platforms that are out there. There were several podcasts that I identified that were of interest or potentially of interest for you when it comes to veterans. There's the Veterans Transition podcast. There's also one called Veteran Resource. And finally, there's Veteran on the Move. While these may not necessarily be employment-focused, obviously it's a way to reach out to vets, to be hearing what's going on in that community, and potentially, even say maybe you sponsor a podcast. Many of them look for sponsors either for weekly or in some longer-term scenario. It's another opportunity to get in front of that population and communicate your message. So now you're saying, John, you've talked about a bunch of platforms in a rather short period of time, and that's great. Awesome. There's all these platforms. I can hit different veteran populations in different ways, different times of the day, but how in the world do I do that and do all my other work? And I can certainly appreciate that position because I'm in a similar position as I'm hiring and trying to identify folks. So what's great out there is there are several aggregator or curation type platforms available and available out there. As Sarah mentioned earlier, I am a Hootsuite certified professional. We utilize Hootsuite here at Team Fishel, and I can tell you it allows me to have my Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram feeds all in one place. If you have a professional account, you can add multiple accounts there, and the idea being, so for example, my Twitter feed for Team Fishel Jobs, I can post an entire week's worth of posts with pictures and those links to the different postings on my ATS. It takes me roughly 30 minutes a week to load an entire week's worth of tweets out there. And what's great with Hootsuite is that if you're not sure of what time to post, because again, knowing the platforms have different best times, you can actually auto-schedule, and Hootsuite will, based on their analytics, say this is the best time to post this particular post. So I can speak highly of Hootsuite because I have used it. There are basic accounts as well that are free. You can go to Hootsuite.com and get a free account. They will allow you 3 profiles in a basic account. Buffer and Sprout Social, which I have mentioned here as well, those are great platforms. I've used them a little bit. I've seen them in action. They have different faces than Hootsuite, offer a little different experience, user experience, and type of content. But I will tell you that they're very good, and they also typically offer some type of free or trial products as well. Something to consider I always tell folks, try them all and see what works best for you because they're out there. TweetDeck is more specific to Twitter. So if you were tracking chats like we talked about earlier, or particular handles or what have you, TweetDeck really is based on just Twitter, but it is one of those aggregators that are out there.
Well,
thanks. You want to talk a bit more, so.
Yes, thanks, John. And we'll be taking people's questions a little bit later. Thank you for those that are submitting those. What I thought would be helpful to kind of bring this all together is to give John some scenarios that he would handle from the perspective of Team Fishel. So, John, if you were working to increase veteran hiring by 5% by the end of 2016 and wanted to use social media as part of your recruiting plan to accomplish that goal, and you need to hire 7 laborers, that is entry-level positions, how would you create a social media strategy to attract and hire veterans for these type of positions?
As we talked about a little bit earlier, knowing that the platforms have different uses and different audiences, I think that with the laborers, knowing they're more entry-level, probably younger vets, I'm going to be looking at them not only from Facebook and potentially boosting the particular job or my page to those that I identify based on the criteria that I can give Facebook to say I'm looking for these types of folks demographically with veteran experience that are looking for opportunities to be working outdoors and working in a construction environment. We'll utilize that as well as Instagram. As I mentioned earlier, that many of the folks that are in the millennials as well and now Generation Z entering the workforce, they're very visual, and so Instagram is a great way to get pictures, be able to drive folks, again, always driving regardless of the platform, driving them towards my website, to my ATS to apply for that job and to get that application in. But I would look particularly, at those two, and even Instagram, as I continue to learn it, I think there's a lot of value there. As I mentioned, I know someone that's using it and is seeing positive effect from it. So looking at that kind of bigger picture, knowing it's long-term, it's planning out those posts and that content. I can tell you from our experience with Team Fishel and being part of the VECI program, not just here in Richmond, my counterparts, my teammates in other areas we're working in 8 different cities with VECI. But we made a national commitment last year to hire 25 vets within the organization by June 30th. As of today, we're at 27, and the month is not done. So we're very excited about that and excited to actually be able to raise that number for our next hiring cycle with the VA. But I will tell you, again, as you're working through the tools, learning the tools, it's a long-term thing. One tweet, one Facebook post is not necessarily going to be effective because you just never know who may see it. But the idea being, especially with that long term, to have 7 hires and it's not an immediate thing, I'm going to make sure that I have that message that I'm thinking about my brand. How is Team Fishel different? What am I offering these folks? Because let's face it, most folks are going to come in as a laborer. They don't want to be a laborer their entire career. I'm excited to be able to tell someone I have teammates that started as laborers right out of high school or right out of the service that have gone into area manager roles over a period of years and can tell a story that if you come in and learn and do the work that you can get promoted and move up through our ranks and be very successful. So again, planning through and saying it's a consistent message regardless of what platform, but looking at Facebook, boosting my jobs there, but then also looking at those visual tools like Instagram and Snapchat.
Excellent. How about this other case study here? The project estimator for a critical project just left Team Fishel, and you want to fill this role pretty quickly with a veteran with a construction background. In this instance, what social media platforms would you employ?
When it's immediate and I need them yesterday, particularly with someone that is more skilled, the first tack for me would be to look at LinkedIn, to look for those veterans groups, but then also for construction groups, identifying folks that have estimator background, because that is a skill that you're not necessarily going to have. The laborer is not going to have the same skill, correct? And so, again, if I'm looking at LinkedIn to say, okay, who are these folks that identify as veterans, that identify as having construction experience, that have estimated projects that deliver bids on time and are successful, focus primarily on LinkedIn. I might very well use a Facebook post as well and boost a post. As I mentioned earlier, 40% of the population over the age of 45, that's who my audience is there. I'm liable to potentially have some traction there as well. So I would look at the Facebook piece, and certainly from an immediate standpoint, I would look at LinkedIn.
Excellent, excellent. I think we'll move now to some questions. I'm going to just not go over the ones on the page initially. I'm going to share some from the audience, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And the first one comes from Carl. He asks, with everyone participating, what draws attention to my social media postings? For example, if I post a job on Twitter, how is anyone going to find it amongst all the clutter?
Thank you, Carl. So to Twitter in particular, it goes back to making sure you're utilizing hashtags. If I understand, and I'm going to use Richmond as an example. In Richmond, the hashtag for Richmond is RVA. So I'm going to make sure that I have a post that says I'm hiring X and hashtag RVA based on the job. Let's say it's some type of programmer position. What are the particular tools? Whatever the particular. Let's say a GIS programmer, for example. I want to make sure I use hashtag GIS. I'm going to use hashtag RVA, and I'm going to have a link to that job posting in there. When folks are using Twitter to look for jobs, they're typically tracking those hashtags like we talked about earlier. So it could be RVA, it could be hashtag jobs. Again, hashtag veterans or hashtag if it's on Military Monday, Military Monday. But you making sure what I see folks often do with Twitter is they'll say, I have a job, but it doesn't necessarily give me anything to go to. Just posting a link to a job isn't going to do it. It doesn't drive. How do I get to those folks? I have to make sure that I'm using the language that they understand, and then I'm making it easy for them to get to that particular post on my ATS or wherever that application may be.
Okay, thank you. KC also asked this question, what is the site John referred to find the HR chat, and what are the dates for the SHRM chat? Sure,
so thank you, KC. The particular site, and I apologize it's not in the presentation, one of them that I use is TWUBS, TWUBS.com, and TWUBS is a site where they aggregate chat lists. The SHRM chat that I mentioned, NextChat, is every Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern. And again, their topics week to week are different. Last week, for example, it was about college recruiting. Next week, or I think this week, it's about the SHRM conference coming up in a few weeks, but every week it's a different topic. What's great with the chats, the majority of organizers of chats, at the end of that particular conversation, so in the case of the SHRM chat, it's an hour long, goes from 3 to 4. When it's done, they will aggregate all the people that have used that hashtag NextChat. They'll aggregate that conversation and post it on their blog so that you can read the entire transcript of that hour. So NextChat's a great one. Another one that's out there is called Work Trends, hashtag Work Trends, and it's a radio show that starts at 1 o'clock every Wednesday afternoon on Blog Talk Radio, and then they have a half-hour radio show and then 30 minutes of chat afterwards. That's a really interesting one. They may talk veterans, they talk a lot about future of work and what have you. If you're in job search, there's OMC Chat, hashtag OMC Chat, which is Friday afternoons at noon, and OMC stands for Open Mic Career. So you'll have not only recruiters and HR professionals on there, but also folks that are actually in job search and conversing and talking about different topics every week. Again, the chats that are most effective are typically weekly. They have a set schedule, and they have to paraphrase one of the social media experts that I'm a fan of, it's like being Norm on Cheers. Everybody knows your name. When you attend a chat and you attend more than once, you get to actually know people and establish relationships and have that engagement. So I appreciate the question.
Excellent. Here's a couple questions you and I kind of came up with prior to this webinar. How do you measure the success of a specific social media tool as part of your recruiting strategy? How do you go about measuring if it's getting the kind of returns you'd like?
I think it boils down to, you know, when we have our goal up front, what is our goal? Be it hiring the 7, hiring the 1, based on skill or what have you. But you know, measuring the success really, initially it's the conversion of clicks to application. The more clicks I have, be it from, if I know it's coming from LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, what have you, what's the conversion of clicks to application? And then from there, what's my interview to hire ratio? If I get 20 people clicking through Twitter and 15 of them are seem to be qualified on paper and we went interview, that's great. But if I have 20 people apply and 2 of them are qualified, we need to kind of rethink what we're doing there. But then from interview to hire ratio, you know, what is the cost per hire? You know, one of the great things with much of social media is there's reduced cost for much of it. And again, using the aggregators, if you are just, you know, as you're trying it on your own, using something like Hootsuite where you can have a free tool that has other free tools included, and you can program and schedule the posts from the different platforms to go out, having that cost per hire and seeing that reduction. And then, you know, what's the time to hire, the time to fill from the time I get the job? And I know different organizations track it differently, but from the point, say if I'm from the point I have the job until I make an offer, or maybe day to start, but that idea of being able to track those. So for me, you know, going through and saying, okay, I set it, what kind of conversion rate am I seeing based on the clicks or the people coming through the tool? How many of them are actually interviewing and then hiring, and then what's the cost there, and then the total time?
Okay. From a recruiter's point of view, what LinkedIn service do you recommend? I know they have different costs. Could you kind of review that for our audience?
Sure. So I want to be careful what I say and how I say in terms of service. I think so much of it, Sarah, is dependent on the types of folks that you are hiring. I will say that I have utilized LinkedIn Recruiter previously. It's a great tool. The particular types of folks I was hiring at that time, it was a cost-effective and really a necessary tool to have to be able to identify, to contact, or to reach out to potential candidates and tell them about opportunities that we had and that they may be a potential match for. I am not using it currently. Again, with the nature of the majority of my jobs that I'm working on, that population is not necessarily on LinkedIn. So I can't say, you know, for me to have a free account here with Teamfishel is fine, but I think it really depends on your organization, and understand that there is some cost attached. We talk about that cost per hire. Some of you may be aware of LinkedIn costs. They can get quite dear, and so it really is a question of, are you identifying folks from that particular platform? If you hire a lot of people from there, you're probably going to see the value in the return on investment. I think that it just depends on who you are and how your organization uses it.
Excellent. What have you found? Have you found that certain age groups or demographics respond better to some social media platforms? You've talked about that a little bit, but could you give any other examples, like if you were, you know, to go back, you know, Generation Z and kind of Generation X, and kind of give us what you're thinking, what you've found?
So again, what we're seeing, especially, you know, we broached it briefly, but obviously, you know, within the social platforms, you want to make sure that what you're utilizing, your particular tool, your applicant tracking system, your application site, according to what your organization does, or if it's just sending resumes to you as an email address, you want to make sure that you're mobile functional, that your sites are mobile functional, that people can apply there, because again, we're seeing millennials and Generation Z growing up with those mobile devices, be it a phone or a tablet of some type. They're in hand. They like that immediate gratification. If I see that job, okay, I want to apply right now. Click, and I can fill out my application. We've been really interested here at Teamfishel to see just how many folks are actually going that route and you know, telling us, oh, I did it on my phone. And so for the platforms, again, the visual platforms, I'm seeing more at least initially, more the younger generations using them. I think that part of it is that education, or just that visual aspect. They like the quick picture, the quick, bite-sized information, as it were, as opposed to somebody, say, maybe the more seasoned, the older veteran that may be familiar, particularly with their experience, education and background and such. They're probably going to be on a LinkedIn in that search, or looking for potential opportunities, or again on the Facebook, because it had that demographic with Facebook has changed so much over the years to be a little more mature.
Okay, great. How do you stay current with what you know? And because a lot of the folks on this call are very busy, and so they don't want this to be overwhelming for them. So how do you stay current? And can you give us an example of how you've connected with veteran talent using the social media platforms that you use?
I'll answer the second part first in terms of the veteran talent. As I mentioned earlier, it's a long-term plan. You really can't just say, I want to post one job about it with a veteran opportunity. It really is, how do I make sure I'm communicating the message, our brand, our story, and finding folks that really fit that for us. But I will tell you that in my experience with our Twitter feed, for example, I've had multiple folks private message or direct message us to say, hey, I'm interested in an opportunity, one of which happened to be a veteran on the other side of the country, contacted me on Twitter and said, I have this background and I'm going to school for this, and started a conversation and talked back and forth a little bit to get a feel for what that person was doing, and we ultimately hired them in one of our California offices. But the idea being that they had seen us out there, they saw a job they thought they might be a match for, and said, listen, I have this experience, I have this skill set, what do you think? Took a little bit of time to understand the potential fit, and then again, that person went ahead and applied, interviewed, and then has come on board. So as far as staying up to date and fresh, it's like I tell folks when they start the social media experience, if you don't use a lot of social media now, don't try to drink from the fire hose. Take 10 or 15 minutes a day to learn a little bit. If you've never been on Twitter, I would compare LinkedIn and Twitter. LinkedIn is very linear. It makes a lot of sense. If you have a LinkedIn page up right now, you can think through, and it's home and jobs and profile, and you can scroll across and down, and the menus make sense. To me, it's a linear thing. Twitter doesn't. Twitter can be a black hole if you don't know anything about it. And so, the question earlier about how do I make sure that I stand out, I will tell you that it's great to be there because many recruiters aren't there. It's not the end-all, be-all, but it is another place to be posting those jobs and have that traffic, making sure that you understand that you're not going to see it all in that 10 or 15 minutes a day, but you get more and more comfortable. The more you're in there, the more you use it, and the time that you spend, you will start to see some reward there. But as far as that, when it comes to Twitter personally, I'm making sure that I'm following thought leaders and folks that are at the top of the game when it comes to social media, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to HR. I'm following them and reading them. I'm listening to their podcasts, trying to glean whatever I can. And again, as we mentioned early on, the fact that there is so much information out there, you do have to kind of discern and glean what makes sense for you, because not all of it's wheat, unfortunately. So how do I separate that out? But I think so. A lot of it is kind of a personal thing, but making sure that you spend a little bit of time, every day or week to week, reading and learning about what's out there, trying to stay ahead as best you can, because it can be difficult. And again, I recognize it's just another tool for the toolbox. I can say we've seen uptick in our candidate applications and movement, and many of them are telling us they're finding us through social media. So that's been a positive for us in the last year and a half or so that we've been doing it.
Excellent, excellent. Do you think in the future we'll see more mobile applications for job postings, and eventually job order systems will eventually become obsolete?
I think that, and again, I don't know how many different employers are represented on this call, but all of us have applicant tracking systems or some type of tool to track who's coming through. Most of those ATSs offer different data points And so much of it, Sarah, I believe, is based on what is a company looking for, how do they slice and dice their data. Obviously, large organizations that have a wealth of candidates coming through, that have analysts in place that can look at these things and understand the big data picture. I don't think they're going to go away. I think the experience, though, is really important. You hear a lot about candidate experience. It starts when they're looking at us on social media. If you think about, many of us have, if you've been in the business world for a year, or 10 years, or 25 or 50 years, one of the things that I have seen change in my time, particularly in HR, is that corporations overall are much more transparent because of the advent of social media, because people can talk and use tools like Glassdoor. So there's more information about companies out there, and I can tell you, when I was in job search a couple years ago, obviously I was reading up on companies, not only on Glassdoor, but on LinkedIn, and looking at their Twitter feeds, and as a candidate, looking at what is the experience going to be like for me? How do I fit in somewhere? What may be a good fit for me? So I think I don't know if it's so much about them becoming obsolete, but more about personalization of experience. I think always making it easier, and so many of us want more than name, rank, and serial number, which is a good thing. However, if it takes more than, say, 30 minutes to complete an application, if that, I think SHRM put out a study a little while back, that 60% of job applications don't even get finished. People will go in and start it, and they don't finish for whatever reason. And there are obviously a myriad of reasons, and that's where big data comes in to help understand what that may be. It could be as simple as, I don't really have the right to work in the United States, or it could be, I have a criminal issue that I don't want to disclose. It could just be, I'm bored. And so looking at, is there an overall picture? We look at that at Team Fishel. We look at our ATS and say, when do people leave? And there's never one. It's not, unfortunately for us, it's not one set standard. Say everybody leaves right here. It's all over the board. So I think it's becoming more personal, making it easier, and we're seeing the advent of video too. Seeing much more. How do I tell little bite-sized things about the company? And maybe it's even embedded in that application process that you might see that streaming function in there.
Absolutely. I do know of folks that I have worked with that are seeking jobs. They've had Skype interviews. They've had go to webinar kind of interviews, because a lot of computers anymore have the cameras on them. So I think we also see a lot of things changing in the interview process as well. I want to thank John for all this information. Do you want to go to the next page? These, again, are ways you can email John and let him know what you thought, or if you have specific questions that we may not have gotten to. When I look, I've answered all the questions that I think that have come up on our questions. As I'm talking, if you have one final one and want to put it in, please do. But John, we not only want to thank you, but would love to invite you to come back maybe in a couple months and give us an update. Things change pretty frequently in this arena, so would you be interested in doing that?
I would. I appreciate that. One thing I would add or ask, I'm always happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I would ask, however, though, that if I don't know you, if you would personalize your message and let me know you saw the presentation today, or that you'd like to talk more about social media or whatever it may be. That helps me, because unfortunately, and I'm sure all of you that are in recruiting or HR or marketing, you probably get a lot of invites, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. But I always appreciate if we have not met before, if you will personalize that invite, I'm happy to connect there.
Okay. I have gotten one more question. If I'm not the guy, how much time should I expect my tech-savvy employee to spend to perform social media management functions?
That's a great question. I think a lot of that is dependent upon the volume. And is this a high volume thing? Is it a low volume? I have 150 jobs open. I have 10 jobs open. It's really tough to quantify. I think you have to think through that strategy and say what is the plan. It's an organic thing. It can grow. It can change. But what is my baseline? And so if I know I want to have one new story on LinkedIn a week, and maybe 2 things on Facebook a week, and maybe I'm tweeting, I have 4 or 5 tweets a day. That time, it's dependent upon the person, the jobs. I hate that I don't have a definitive answer, because it's a great question, but I think so much of it is contingent on what's your marketing plan, what do you want to have out there about your brand, but also what is the volume.
Maybe another way. Yeah. How much time do you spend a week, would you say?
Sure. So I would say because I have the aggregator to help me with Hootsuite, I post jobs on Twitter 5 days. So I have tweets going out 5 days a week, 1 hour. So 24 posts a day, 5 days a week. And on the weekends, I have 8 hours or 8 posts on Saturdays and Sundays. And again, I can load that entire schedule in roughly 30 minutes not with the links, but then also with the pictures that I mentioned. Typically a picture can double your click rate. So I'll have pictures for the majority of my posts on that. LinkedIn, with Facebook rather, I tend to do for my jobs page, 1 post a day. I don't post constantly there. It's more 1 a day. I can load those in no time. So, but again, that's also me having a comfort level and knowing what I need to have out there, and knowing it's that many jobs as opposed to 2 or 3 or 3,000, anywhere in between.
Well, fantastic. If you go to the last slide, please. Well, we so appreciate you, John. Thank you again for your time, and thank you to everyone that was with us on this phone call. I think it's been an excellent webinar, great information, but we only get better with feedback at the V3 program. So when you close out of this webinar, a pop-up will come to take a survey. We want to know how you felt about it. We want to know what we can do better, and if we should offer this again, please let us know. Any other comments that you have, we love to take that in. And again, thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.